That would lead us into 2001. And the morning of September 11th, 2001, you're at the office with Michael Mixon, who had just begun his career with the squad, 15 years on the job by that point itself, but only a year with the squad. Everybody else is either off duty, coming into work later, or it's their day off. And take me through the sequence of events that day.
Well, I was in the office. Mike was there. It was his first day in a team responding to assignments citywide. He had come back from school. He was trained. He's well-versed. And we heard chatter on the, first we heard a plane go overhead. And then we heard the impact of American 11 hit the tower. Our office is just about a mile north of where the World Trade Center was. We heard the impact, and then the radio frequency, the channel just lit up with different units reporting a giant explosion, a plane crash, a huge fire. And I got up, Mike got up, I went for the radio and the keys, and we started out the door to the World Trade Center. We had not been requested, we just self-dispatched to the emergency. When we pulled out of our garage, which is on Charles Street, I turned west, and as we passed Hudson Street, I looked to the left, which is a northbound street. We had to go south. I saw the hole in the Trade Center in the North Tower, and I said, this is no accident. So on the way down there, I'm driving down, and at one point we're taking side streets because everybody's fleeing the scene. We're using every access we could to get as close as we could to the Trade Center. I stopped just to the rear of number 7 World Trade Center, got out to make an observation of the tower, the amount of debris coming down. And at that point, my option was to go on VC Street to West Street, to where most all our emergency response would go to, the main entrance, or to the east side on VC Street near number 5. And I chose that because of that photograph that we had from '93. Didn't want to get caught in the gridlock because we were one of only 2 teams in the city that day that was working. And we actually, during the day, we were actually pulled from the scene to respond to other bomb-related calls in the city. And we left and then we'd come back. So we set up a command post at Church and VC. We had a telephone kiosk there. We called the operations unit. We set up a direct line. And I was standing on a corner, and Mike was about 5-10 feet away from me. And I heard a roar, and it was United coming through. And I looked up, and I know aircraft. I used to moonlight for the airlines. And the plane took an arcing dive into Tower 2 and went right through it. It actually disintegrated as it went through. And I dove into our truck. The door was open. I drove into the truck to get away from the debris. Mike headed north as fast as he could go. And the only thing I saw was the bottom of his shoes headed north. One of the engines in the street bounced in the street not far from our vehicle, and the frag from the engine that broke apart broke the windshield out of our truck. The landing gear from the part of the, I think it's the front gear, bounced in the street and bent our kiosk telephone booth down into an L shape onto the ground. So that was the end of our direct contact. I climbed out of the truck to survey the damage to make sure we were still operational. And Mike was coming back down the street at this point, trying to dust himself off with all the debris coming down. And the chief of detectives, Bill Ali, and his driver pulled up. And he got out of the car and he looked up, he said, "What happened to the other tower?" I said, "It looked like a 767, Chief." I said, "It was going so fast, I couldn't tell, but it looked like United Airlines colors." And he went right through the building. And he picked up the radio. This was at 9:03 in about 30 seconds. And he told the dispatcher on citywide radio, "Notify the Pentagon that we are under attack." And at that point, we knew this was a a huge terrorist attack.
As you say that, I'm getting chills down my spine. We'll take a quick pause here on the Mike Colón podcast, and we'll be right back. So at this point, we're back here on the Mike Colón podcast, episode 99 with Kevin Barry, volume 12 of the miniseries Tales from the Boom Room, profiles the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. At this point, guys are coming in. It's a total recall of all personnel that can come down to the scene. Certain guys were out of state on different training. Certain guys were home or just getting off of a tour, and now they're coming back. So before we get to the other guys filing in, one of the photos that was sent my way here of the scene immediately after the second plane struck is here. And you could see just first, I'll show just the fireball of the impact of United 175. And that is this photo I have here. And you can see the vantage point of it from the Brooklyn Bridge. And the emergency response as well is extensive. You can see the Port Authority police there stationed. You can see in the background there, the Customs House, 6 World Trade Center, which would play a central role in this event later on, and personnel filing in left and right, the makeup of the Trade Center as well. I'm showcasing here. And so Brian Hearn's down the street. He's in a security car because he's working an off-duty job on Wall Street. It was Dan McNally's day off. Jim Carano was getting the Detective of the Month award from his union with Jerry Sheehan at Rock Russo's on the Bay. Dan Richards wasn't supposed to come until 10. And then finally they all converge. First, you see Brian walking down the street. So just as you're standing on this street corner looking up at this unbelievable sight, that in your, at that point, 33 years in the job, I mean, even for you, it had to be pretty shocking. Take me through the bomb squad's response from that point forward.
Well, at that point, our position at Church and VC, we had used that to open a egress for any of the ambulances that were coming out of West Street to go right across and take VC right across down in front of City Hall and up the FDR Drive to Bellevue with any emergencies that they had. We kept that open. Brian Hearn showed up. Then let's see. There were about a dozen emergency service cops marching in formation with one of the sergeants. One of the guys I recognized and made eye contact was John Delara. He raised his eyes like, what are we getting into? And I looked at him and I went, and that was the last time I saw him, and he was killed that day. As the other guys from the bomb squad started to arrive, we tried to set up a plan, and 3 or 4 of us went down. I think it was Danny Richards. When he showed up, I said, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the office coordinating things." And Danny said to me, "I'm not missing this for the world. Somebody else can handle the phones." And that was his response. So about 5 of us went down VC Street West, and we went to where they have the escalators to the plaza, and there was an up and a down. And one of the guys went and shut the up escalator off so people could use it as a means of egress. That picture you just previously showed of people evacuating from the Customs House and that photo I took on the corner that morning. And it shows you how calmly these people were evacuating. And that was after 2 planes had struck the towers.
And a lot of people, sorry,
a lot of crowd. They tried to get into the subway, but the subways were already shut down. So people were going down the stairs, then coming back up and looking for direction. And we told them just to go north. A lot of people went west. And when they got to the water, fortunately, the people that run all of the ferries and the shuttles got together on the Marine Band radio and sent everybody they could to help evacuate people from the west side of Manhattan. And I know there was a TV special about it. And it was something that, being on the east side of the tower that day, we really didn't know about that, what was happening, other than the fact that I talked to one of the guys years later about the being on the harbor launch. And he said that a woman would toss her child from the side of the pier before they even tied up onto the deck of the boat, trying to get her child to safety and get out of there. So there are some stories that still haven't been told.
I imagine we're coming up on, of course, 20 years since that awful day. And a lot of people, I was going to say, that worked in those towers that day were already familiar with the possibility of something like this because they were also there in 1993, which may or may not have contributed to their calmness. I mean, a lot of the guys you saw there, the cops, I mean, obviously the firemen are going to have their bunker gear on and whatnot. The emergency service cops, same thing. You see the cops wearing helmets and whatnot because debris is falling. Is that the kind of gear you and Mike had on?
No, we had business suits on. They've changed it today, I think under some advanced guidance from the current CO, Mark Torrey. He got them into a more relaxed and better gear, BDUs and golf shirts instead of a business suit, and then putting an 80-pound suit on top of that.
Yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do.
But one of the other people I saw that day was, let's see, from the FBI.
Lenny Hatton.
Lenny Hatton. Lenny Hatton saw me, I waved to him, and he said to me, I'm going to the South Tower to see if I can help with the evacuation. Never saw him after that. For a extended period of time, the FBI never acknowledged the loss of Lenny Hatton in the World Trade Center. In the presentation that I give on the World Trade Center, I show Lenny's picture and that he was killed that day. It wasn't until they did a special on TV where they found Lenny's weapon in the piles of debris, and they had to use the same system of raising the hidden numbers on the gun. Did they confirm that it was Lenny's gun and that they finally acknowledged that he was killed at the World Trade Center? Why? I have no idea why he was never listed. His name was not on the flag of heroes when they did that flag. And I just don't know why that agency did that. They finally did a TV special about it. They've never confirmed his remains to my knowledge, though.
And that morning, if you've ever seen the documentary, the Naudet brothers, the French brothers put together of that event, you could see when Chief Pfeiffer of the FDNY, who later became their chief of counterterrorism, there's a point where Lenny is talking to either him or one of the other firemen in the lobby, and it's clearly him. He was later identified to be him, and he's on the radio. Now they recognize him as a line of duty death, but he's on the radio saying, I'm helping the fire department get the people out, and that's the last you heard of him. So I don't understand that either, and I'll show his picture momentarily. So as the morning advances, there's the evacuation process in place. The buildings are becoming more and more unstable. And at 9:59, were you present for the collapse of the South Tower? And if so, take me through, I guess, that moment of surviving.
At about 9:20, 4 or 5 of us from the bomb squad went up the stairs, the escalators to the plaza level, and we walked towards the front, the east side access to the North Tower, at which time bodies were hitting the deck from the North Tower. They were coming out and landing, I'd say 15 to 20 feet from where we were walking. The sound that it made, you never forget. I have seen people when I was in emergency service jump. I know what it's like, but to see the volume of people that were forced to jump because of the extreme heat that they were in above the fire floor is just utterly mind-boggling.
And it's one of the photos of the South Tower's collapse. I wouldn't show anything graphic at all to my audience, but for my audience, if the following picture upsets you, I suggest you perhaps skip over this part. I just want to provide fair warning. And that is the collapse of the South Tower that you're seeing here, which occurred at 9:59 a.m. that morning. This is, of course, excuse me, let me just backtrack a little bit. You see just the absolute devastation of it. This is, as one of the photos describes here, and I'm quoting it, unable to hold the top portions, 110,000-ton weight, the South Tower 2 World Trade Center collapses 56 minutes after being hit. Thousands of rescue workers and office workers are still inside. Collapse produces a huge cloud of smoke and concrete dust. Streets are covered with ash. People are disoriented. It collapsed straight down, of course, and this is my words. into the street below, which also injured and killed more people on the ground who were outside the complex, but had been in the general area when this collapse occurred. So at this point, one tower is still standing and fully engulfed. You're still on the scene. At this point, on the plaza, the gentleman from the bomb squad and ESU now have to clear off the plaza. There are people that are stuck there that survived the collapse, but now don't have a way to get off the plaza. So that's when some of the guys of the bomb squad clear off the plaza of all the debris, provide a pathway for them to walk, and then get off the plaza and clear it out successfully. And that's when Mike Curtin's team comes down. Sergeant Curtin is with Officer John Villara, Police Officer Bill Bury, and Police Officer Mark DeMarco, and meeting up with the members of the bomb squad, the two Dans, Danny Richards, as well as Detective Steve Berberich and Police Officer Joe Dolan. At this point, are you with the guys, or are you doing other things relating to the rescue operation?
Just prior to that, I went back with Brian Hearn to our point, our mobilization point that we started, to confer with the chief of detectives. And just before we went to the plaza level, I had said to the chief of detectives, I said, this building is not going to last. And my theory on that was the number of times I'd seen the piers catch fire and they'd burn and then collapse into the river. I said, this fire is going to cause that building to collapse. Did I know it was going to collapse in 59 minutes? Not at all. I thought it would burn through the night and possibly the next day there'd be an event where it would collapse, but never suspecting that it would collapse in 59 minutes. At that point, I was back at church in VC. I happened to be looking up at the Tower 2, and I saw what appeared to be liquid flames pouring out of the east side of the building, which was actually the floors spalling and breaking and the jet fuel pouring out of the side of the building. At that point, I made a U-turn without touching the ground and started running east. I ran so fast that I passed two Kenyans who were in New York trying out for the marathon, trying to get away from the tower as it collapsed. And I got about a half a city block before the cloud of dust pushed by me, and I tripped over some type of debris that was in the street, got myself up and got into a building, which I had seen two women as I was running go into the door. So I knew the door was open. I got into the building and there were about a dozen people inside in the lobby. Everything was dark because we lost all power. And somebody said, well, where's the superintendent? And the guy came over, he's the superintendent. And I said, is there a way to get out through the basement to the next block? So if we go through the basement with the people, can we get out to the next street, either the block above VC or over towards Broadway? And he said, I don't know. I said, okay, well, let's go down the stairs. He didn't have a flashlight. The only thing I had was a little pocket flashlight that was attached to my keychain. And that's what we used to try and get down the basement. While I'm in the basement, I hear shots being fired upstairs. And I go, uh-oh, what's this? Well, it turns out that there was a big glass wall building inside an office, and it was a small bank or credit union. And a police officer also trying to find an access route out, took his weapon and fired through the glass because the doors were locked to get through to try and see if they could get out a back way. And I said, well, okay, at least it wasn't somebody taking their own life because of the situation. So that's how catastrophic it was. And we got back to the first floor. There was no way out. We heard banging outside and we opened the door and we pulled two women in that were covered, totally covered with about 4 to 6 inches of dust from head to toe. And we turned around and we took a water bottle from one of those big 5-gallon water jugs. We sat them down and we poured the water over them. And when we washed them down, you could not believe the facial expressions on them. They were just total fear. They didn't know where they were, what happened, whatever. A few minutes later, we hear banging again on the glass, and it's several firemen who have been knocked down or crawling down the street with their Scott packs on. And the Scott packs, when they tried to stand up, banged against the glass windows. We heard it. We opened the door and brought them in. There were 2 or 3 of them. The rest of the people in their company were lost, were killed that day. At that point, I went back out through the dust, back to our vehicle. I had moved our vehicle from its position facing south in the intersection to north, close to the federal building that's in some of the pictures. That's just north of the northeast corner of the complex.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for protection of the vehicle after we lost the windshield. With that, Manny Richards, who was the sergeant in the first deputy commissioner's office, came around the corner, and he's in civilian clothes. I'm in civilian clothes. He recognizes me. And he says, "Kevin, have you got a vehicle?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you evacuate the first deputy commissioner for me?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, hold on. I got to get him. We're in number 7, and he's on crutches." He had come to the scene. Joe Dunn, the first deputy commissioner, had come to the scene on crutches. Well, I go out, I get the vehicle, I try and get some of the, everything's covered with dust. Fortunately, our windows were up, but everything is still inside the vehicle. It's being sucked in by the, the fan and everything. But we get our truck opened. Brian Hearn is in the front seat. I get in the front seat to drive. And with this, Manny Lopez opens the door, and there's Joe Dunn, the commissioner, on crutches. And Brian Hearn goes, "Oh, Commissioner, how are you?" He jumps out, gives him his seat in the front, and he climbs into the back. Now, unbeknownst to me, there were at least 5 or 6 other police officers of different ranks in the back of the truck. Fortunately, that day, we didn't have a dog with us. But they're sitting on top of the kennel. They're sitting on top of the robot. They're climbing in. They're just packed into the back. There's a metal gate between the front and the back to protect the driver and the recorder from any flying debris in the truck. Mm. And somebody's banging as I'm pulling away. I'm starting to go north on Church Street. And I look in the rear view mirror. And in that convex mirror, I can see the tower collapsing behind me, Tower 1. Commissioner Dunn says, "I'm hitting the siren. I'm telling people on the loudspeaker, get to a side street, take cover in a side street." And he says to me, "Be careful, don't run anybody over." I said, "Okay, I won't run anybody over." I said, "I'm just trying to get to Chambers so we can make a turn out of the path of this cloud." And as I turned the corner on Chambers and headed towards police headquarters, that huge cloud just blew right by us on Church Street. Just was total blindness after that. We got over to police headquarters. Commissioner got out. There were security people there at headquarters. All the other people jumped out of the back. Brian Hearn and I tried to get back into the scene. The closest we could get was about 50 feet off the corner of Broadway and VC because everything was just blocked with debris. So we parked our truck there, and I ran into Ed Cattell, who's responded. He based out of Washington, but I think he was closer that day. He actually showed up and he said, "Where can I park?" I said, "Ed, you can park anywhere you want. You can park on a sidewalk. You can park anywhere you want. Nobody's giving out tickets today." So we went back to the scene, and back at the scene, it was chaos.
I imagine.
And 17 years later, I went to an emergency service reunion out at the Wantor Inn. Mm-hmm. And I go up, and it's a bunch of old timers there. And I'm looking around, and I recognize one old timer. The rest are all younger guys. And with this, a young guy comes walking in, and he says to the sign-in guy taking the roster, he said, "I'm so-and-so from Nassau County Emergency Service." He said, "I was in the city on 9/11. I was a city cop then. I'm out in Nassau now. And this is my brother. He's Deputy Chief Sheehan from the fire department." So I hear him say that, and I said to the guy, "You bring a fireman to an emergency service racket? You're crazy. You'll get him killed." So the guy starts to tell the story where he was on 9/11. And I'm listening to him. And he said, yeah, he said, I was in number 7. And he said, and I came out and I was driving the commissioner and our car was about 2 feet high. It was crushed. And he said, the commissioner was on crutches. And I'm listening to this and I'm looking. And he said, and the commissioner got in the front of the truck and I got in the back. And as we pulled away, the tower collapsed behind me. And he said, and I said, yeah. And you went to headquarters and they dropped you off. He goes, yeah, right on the plaza. He goes, yeah, how'd you know that? I said, I was driving a truck. And he goes, what? He said, yeah. I said, I was driving a truck. And he goes, oh, you saved my life. You saved my life. I said, no, I didn't save your life. I said, but you didn't pay the fare on the cab meter. You owe me 15 bucks. So we started to laugh and it was the light side of the night. But it was 17 years later before I met the guy who was in the back of the truck, one of the ones.
And at that point, I mean, members had been lost and the South Towers collapsed, of course, but at this point, you lose more members in the collapse of the North Tower. Jim Leahy, who worked downstairs from you guys in the 6th precinct, was lost. By all accounts, a great guy and a patrol officer with 9 years of experience. I'm sure you knew him. Obviously, members of the emergency service unit were lost in that moment. In the lobby of 6 World Trade Centers, where Detective Richards, Officer DeLara, and Sergeant Curtin were killed. Yeah. When you first learned that Dan was missing, I know members of the squad held out hope that he'd show up okay. But learning that he was missing at first that day, take me through what went through your mind, especially considering the magnitude of the damage downtown.
Well, we just hope beyond hope that he might be okay, that he might be located. But I believe it was Steve Berberich who said he was running and Danny was just, nearby him when he was running. And he said everything just collapsed and that was when he lost sight of him. And it wasn't until 9 months later, at probably about 2 or 3 in the morning, I was home sleeping, getting ready to go in for a day tour. And I got a call from the office from Ray Clare. And he said, come on into the office. They found Danny. And it was Good Friday, 9 months later.
March 29th, 2002. You were one of the detectives that recovered him?
No. I got there as his body was being brought up the ramp. And I went with the motorcade to the morgue and I was there when they started the postmortem.
I won't ask about that out of respect. So we won't go into that. But when you look back on, listen, you worked with the man for 15 years when he got to the bomb squad in 1986. So 15 years in the squad, great guy by all accounts. I always like to focus on how these men lived. So when you look back on Dan Richards, who was a team member of yours for a while.
Yes.
What are some of the funny memories and stories that you could share of him?
One of the funniest, my wife and I were in Hawaii for our 25th anniversary. I said to Danny, I said, I'm going to Hawaii. He said, oh, so am I. When are you going to be there? I tell him, well, we were in Honolulu on the day of our anniversary. And a friend of my wife's, close family friend, worked for the Sheraton in New York. And she got us a room with an upgrade for our anniversary in Honolulu. So Danny calls me and I said, well, why don't you come over to our hotel? And I meet him in the lobby and he says, come on, we'll go for a drink. I said, no, come on upstairs, we'll go to our room. He said, you got room in you have space in your room, you can have a drink? I said, yeah, come on upstairs. So I come upstairs, my wife was there. She knew Danny and she knew that Danny's one of his favorite drinks was Cliquot champagne. So we had several bottles of Cliquot champagne set up for our anniversary. And Danny walks into the room and he goes, wow, look at this room. We had a view of the beach, big, wide, right on the ocean front, big, huge, sweet Diamond Head. Go in the bedroom, you look out, you see Diamond Head out the other side of the room. And he goes, how'd you get this room? I said, a friend of a friend. And I said, and it was a comp upgrade. I said, so we're here, let's have, and we sat. I think he had trouble finding his way back to the hotel that night. Because I think we polished off 3 bottles of Cliquot. And I think behind me over here, there's a picture of him we took that day. Let me see if I can. Yep.
Kevin Barry is our guest here in the Mike Colón podcast.
I don't know if you, I'll try and hold this up so you can see it, Mike. That was taken when we were in Hawaii.
I can see it. Oh, that's a great photo. Look at that smile.
And Danny was a great guy, hard worker, very proud of his military service, and just a great worker to be with. Always felt comfortable with him. Knew that he had my back, just like he had to back everybody else in the team when you're working.
Absolutely.
It was a shame we lost him.
I always, anytime I do a Bomb Squad interview, I always like to ask about him, just so we can learn more about who he was. Because, you know, as I always say, we know how these men died, but let's focus on how they lived.
Well, a lot of people don't realize, but Charlie Epps, who was also in my team, Eddie Hayes, Charlie Epps, was Danny's cousin. And he used to rib Danny all the time because they were from Tennessee. And, you know, he'd keep attacking him about Tennessee and everything else, and really gave him a hard time. And Danny was always trying to rise above it. And Charlie would come in with another one, you know, another zinger. So it was a lot of fun back and forth in the squad. We had a good team.
One of the funniest stories I've heard of him is that there was, as you know, he went out to Bosnia for a while. Don Stowie told this story when he was on the show. He was coming back from Bosnia. He'd been there for 13 months. And he was coming in through the airport. I think it might have been Newark or whatnot. So Sadawi and Steve Burbridge go out to Newark to greet him, and they pull a prank on him where, you know, they say the TSA has to pull you in for a cavity check and a strip search, and he's just like, and Sadawi and Burbridge are dressed up in these disguises, and they have a sign for him because Steve Burbridge would tease him with calling him Norman, the character in Norman Bates, imitating the voice of Norman's mother. And they had a sign, "Welcome home, Norman," that they pulled out of. So that's one of the funniest stories that I think I've heard of him. And I think the best thing that I noted in the book, Bomb Squad: A Year Inside the Nation's Most Exclusive Police Unit, and I'll hit on a few more things, and I don't want to keep it too long. You've been so generous with your time, is that a lot of officers had an elaborate tribute, which is fine. They deserved it. You know, for example, Ray Suarez and Mark Ellis, two transit officers who got killed that day, their lockers, from what I last heard, are exactly as they left them. Nobody's touched those lockers in Transit District 4. But with Dan, you know, he was described by all accounts as a modest and simple man, to where in the Bomb Squad locker room where his locker used to be, it was just that. It was just an empty locker. You know, there wasn't any flowers in there. There wasn't a plaque. I mean, his plaque hangs in the memorial wall for the 6 members that lost their lives in the line of duty in the squad's history. But it was just a reminder that, you know, and it touched me because it's basically said that, you know, we're always going to be missing one. And he was described as the heart and soul of the unit. And the book said that the men felt that when he died, a piece of every single one of them died with him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so if you don't know who he is, just read up on him. And I am dedicating this episode to his memory, to Ron Richards' memory, no relation to Dan, a detective who joined after September 11th into the Bomb Squad in 2002, who passed away from ground zero cancers. Lou Alvarez, this episode is also dedicated to him. So 2002, you retired from the NYPD, 34 years. Did 9/11, were you going to retire anyway, or did 9/11 serve as the reason why you chose to leave?
9/11 was the ultimate, and I said, it's time to go. I've been lucky so far. I couldn't have done it without the support of my family. And that's important to all police officers, especially today with the tone and tenor of the attitudes from some of the public.
Absolutely. I mentioned the book. Of course, I read that book and I loved it. I finished it. It was a graduation gift when I graduated college. And so I was glad that I was able to get it and find out and make friendships with so many of these great individuals who I've been so fortunate to interview and get to know off the air. So you added some contributions to that book. It's a really well done book. I'll show one of the photos that you sent of me here. And in just a moment, just pull this up here. I think at a party. Here we go. And I'll share it right now. Here. of this book being released in 2006. It showcased, of course, the squad's activity throughout the year 2004. But, what I loved about it, as I explained before in a previous episode, it went back in time. It took a deep dive into the origins, I should say, of the squad, the major investigations they had. So when these two guys, Ted Gerstein and Rich Esposito from ABC News, are putting together this book on the squad, and were you approached at all? And how did you feel about how they did in writing about the squad in this book? Because I personally loved it, but obviously you were in the squad. So what do you think about it?
Rich actually went in. I had known Rich prior to that from different news events and whatever, but I had actually retired, I think, when he was actually embedded in the bomb squad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, by this point you retired, yes.
And in that picture, you had Tony Senf, Neil Monaco, Rich, and Tony Senf's son. Those are the people in that photo. And Tony's good friend and Richie Pastorella to this day were good friends.
That's good. And I'm glad that they're here. I think that's, for as devastating as that night was in 1982, it's a victory story, because even though they've suffered injuries, even though they were dealt this catastrophic blow, look at their perseverance. Look at the fact that they've been able to soldier on 40 years later, almost 40 years later. If that isn't the biggest screw you to the terrorists that planted that bomb, I don't know what is, because they've gone on, they lived their lives. And obviously we wish that this didn't happen to them, and that they would have been able to enjoy long careers and retire on their own terms. But with the hand that they were dealt, they've emerged from it quite victorious and quite courageous. And it's a great example for sure. Before I get to the concluding segment of the show, and like I said, it's been so great talking with you. I'm really happy that you made the time for me. They went through a ceremony, did Mayor Bloomberg's administration, in renaming streets for various heroes of 9/11, NYPD, FDNY. Morton Street in Greenwich Village, where Dan used to live. For context, as I've explained before to my listeners, he didn't live on Long Island. He could have. He went to take care of his older brother, who was a Vietnam vet, who was a WMT, who died 3 weeks before 9/11. But he lived primarily in Manhattan, which by all accounts he loved. So in Greenwich Village in 2003, October to be exact, the street was renamed after him. And I'll show one of the photos that I have here. It's just a memorial poster made for Detective Richards, beautifully done. But also here, if I can go and retrieve one of the photos, I will. Here it is, Morton Street, Detective Claude Danny Richards Way, and also a photo of, I believe are these Dan's sisters and his brother with Ray Kelly?
I believe that's his brother. I don't know about the two women in the picture, mm-hmm. along with Commissioner Kelly.
So were you pivotal in helping get that street renamed after him?
No, but I was there for the ceremony. I came back for the ceremony.
Okay. So when it was unveiled, I imagine it was pretty emotional. It's a great honor to a great man. Obviously, we wish he was still here, but nonetheless, a great honor. So when it was unveiled, just take me through your emotions, just seeing that sign.
Well, it was emotional, and it was well-deserved. You just hope over the years that people will pass the word down, why that sign is there and what occurred that day, and why they renamed the street in his honor, and that his memory won't be forgotten in 20 years or so. Because a lot of people today, you'd say, oh, what happened, 9/11, what's that?
It's true.
They're not teaching terrorist events in schools today.
They're not. And it's unfortunate. I think my generation is the last to have learned about it, really. In that, I was alive when it occurred. I was 1 year old, so I don't remember it. But obviously, the stories are told, and it's important because we don't want to forget these men and women. And I said this to one of our mutual friends. I won't say who off the air, but I said, if people were to walk down that street right now and you pulled them to the side, how many of them would know who he was and why? Just what you said, why that street's named after him. Mm-hmm. And I do. So I'll be in the city soon. I do want to make it a point to go down to Morton Street and quietly pay my respects. So we'll get to the concluding segment now of this podcast, and we didn't even cover everything of your career and your life. I'll have to bring you back. If you want to come back, I hope that we can touch on some of the other cool things you've been involved in, of course. But this segment is called Rapid Fire, 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 answers from me. Are you ready?
Ready.
First, Funniest call you ever responded to. And if it's not G-rated, you could say pass.
Well, I responded to a suspicious package in Queens in a supermarket in a freezer, along with Charlie Epps and Eddie Hayes and Sergeant Guy Renzi. It was a yard. We used the robot. We opened the freezer. We reached in and we grabbed a 2 foot wide by foot deep legal envelope. And it was tied up with a brown string. We shook it apart with the robot. It fell out. The contents fell out on the floor in the supermarket. We tilted the robot arm down so with the TV we could see. And what was inside was a skeleton arm and hand. From the shoulder down. And then we zoomed in closer. There was a note, handwritten note, and it said, "This is an armed robbery. Give us the money." So that was the end of that suspicious package that day.
Somebody's got a sick sense of humor, but it's funny. I gotta say it's funny. Second best piece of advice anyone ever gave you.
Don't do anything that would embarrass yourself, that would put you on the front page of one of the big city newspapers and embarrass you and your family. And make sure you remember your family. And don't forget to give attaboys to the people that you're working with when they do a good job.
Good advice. I like it. Third, favorite thing to do during your downtime?
Downtime?
Mhm.
Cruising on an ocean liner across the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific to the South Pacific.
Not a bad way to spend it.
And spending time with my grandkids. And we've already had them on a cruise to Alaska.
Oh, that's the best. One of my fondest memories as a kid is spending time with we never went on a cruise, but grandparents are the best. So we shout out to all the grandparents out there. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Del Frisco's on 6th Avenue
Mhm.
and Kavanaugh's in Blue Point, New York.
Not bad choices.
A local-
So fifth and finally, that brings us to the last question. You have, of course, 34 years of experience in the NYPD. You did a lot. You experienced a lot. What advice would you give a young cop that's coming on the job now?
Today,
Mhm.
I would suggest he take the test for the fire department or take a test for a federal job in law enforcement, whether it be Secret Service, ATF, FBI. The federal jobs, their pay is equivalent, if not better, and you're not dealing with the riffraff that you are currently in the United States in the major cities, sorry to say.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. So that concludes what's been a great episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 99. I'm so glad that Kevin Barry could join us for what was volume 12 of the miniseries Tales from the Boom Room, profiles the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. This was a happy accident. If I never met Bill Ryan through another show that we're both fans of, and he came on this show, I would have never in turn gotten the chance to speak with guys like Don Staley, Dan McNally, Jim Carano, Paul Perico, and today Kevin Barry. So shout out to Bill Ryan. And this has just been one of the very fun projects within the Mike the New Haven podcast that I'm so honored to take on. Before we go, if we have any plugs, we'll give them. But is there anything that you'd like to plug? If not, it's okay.
I'd like to turn around and say thanks to my wife for 51 years for putting up with me, putting up with the police department, the emergency service division, the bomb squad, the fire department, and a few other things. I mean, 9/11, when I came home that first night, she made me stand outside and use the hose to wash me down. She wouldn't let me in the house. I was so covered with jet fuel and dust and everything else. So, but we also hosted 3 people from different agencies from the West Coast who came in after 9/11 and stayed with us for a week or two. The commanding officer of the LA Sheriff's Office bomb squad, one of their senior bomb techs, and the chaplain from the San Francisco Police Department stayed with us. And each morning, the 4 of us would drive into New York, and then we'd go down at ground zero, and everybody would help clean, at the end of the day, when we came home, clean up before we go in the house. We had to replace our washing machine 2 months later because of all of the dust and debris that would jam the pump and all of that. But my wife cooked all the meals. We barbecued outside, and that sort of held us together. you know, and release the stress when we could come home at night after, you know, we were doing 12-hour shifts at least. That was the minimum. So.
Well, shout out to Mrs. Berry. You know, is there anything else you'd like to add, or is that's about it?
No, I think that's good. I think maybe we should get you an interview with Fox News, get your slot on Fox News soon.
Well, you know, never know where the road will take me. You know, I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy interviews with folks like you. So on my end, if you don't know where to reach me by now, Twitter, I'm at Mike in New Haven for all the listeners out there. If you're listening for the first time for Kevin, Instagram, original_MC1, LinkedIn, Mike Colón. Just type in my name and then MIC''D, which is the first word for the name of my podcast, Mike to New Haven. And if you want to contact me, my sports business line for all sports related podcast inquiries for this show is 917-727-0891, or you can email me, Colón on sports, COLON on sports @gmail.com for any other podcast related inquiries in regards to police, fire service, or news, as we do that as well here. You can contact me, email the Colón Report, THECOLON report @gmail.com, or you can call me at 917-781-6189. I'd be happy to talk with you. Of course, my YouTube channel for the video version of this podcast is MC's Audio, MC''S Audio. I don't want to say who my guest for the milestone 100th episode is. I want to lock it down, but hopefully I can, and I can promote it in the coming days. I'll try to do something big for episode 100 of the Mike to New Haven podcast. But in the meantime, I do want to say in all seriousness, episode 99, as I mentioned earlier, is dedicated to the memory of 3 detectives from the bomb squad. Detective Lou Alvarez, who fought so vigorously for first responders and passed away from 9/11 related illnesses. Detective Ron Richards, who joined the bomb squad in 2002 after a stint in the emergency service unit. He also passed away from 9/11 related illnesses. And of course, last but certainly not least, this episode is dedicated to the memory of Detective Dan Richards, who made the ultimate sacrifice on September 11th, 2001. They're very much loved and they're very much missed. We pay tribute by dedicating this episode to them. On behalf of retired NYPD Bomb Squad Detective First Grade, Kevin Berry, this has been Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. I'm Mike Colón, and we see you next time.
If I can help just one more first responder, then it makes it all worthwhile for me. It really, you know, it sounds like a cliche, but it's the truth.